The inflation was going up long before the war in Ukraine started. So if everything was great until February 27th, and then Russia invades, and then all of a sudden the inflation goes up. All right, but that's not true. This inflation goes back to late 2021. It was persistent in the fall. We all remember the Fed and the Treasury saying transitory, 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 and then finally, I think Jay Powell was testifying before Congress in I want to say January, could have been early February, but he said it's time to retire the word transitory. So that was his way of throwing in the towel. And Janet Yellen admitted she was mistaken also. So it predates the war, number one. Number two, energy prices are going up because there's a war with Russia. Well, I wonder why that is. Well, the reason is not because Putin invaded Ukraine, it's because the U.S. counterattacked with financial sanctions. Now, bear in mind, go back to January 21st, 2021, when Biden was sworn in as president and then went back to the White House. What was the first thing he did? He closed the Keystone XL Pipeline. This is a pipeline that would bring oil from Alberta, Canada, into the United States, where it would connect at a hub, I believe it's in Kansas, but somewhere in the central United States. And then the hub distributes it to the entire country. So he shut down that pipeline, which curtailed the supply of oil from Canada. Then ended new leasing, oil and gas exploration leasing on federal lands, handicapped the fracking industry, and took a number of other steps using environmental tools, climate alarm, government subsidies, et cetera, to basically, to the extent possible, shut down the U.S. energy industry as much as possible. Now, you can't shut down completely, of course, but everything happens at the margin. And then we end up with oil prices doubling or tripling, really, from $40 to $120 in under a year, which is comparable to what happened in 1973 with the Arab oil embargo. And then Biden wakes up and says, guess we need more oil. And he wants to reopen leasing. I said they shut it down. They did, but he wants to reopen it. He's begging Saudi Arabia to pump more. Saudi Arabia is kind of not returning his phone calls. He's begging Venezuela to pump more. Oh, great. The greatest pariah dictator in the Western Hemisphere, and we're begging him for oil. So why don't we drill our own oil? Because we were a net exporter up until 2021. And then Biden came in and we lost that edge and became a net importer, including recently buying oil from Russia. They curtailed that for political reasons, but that's kind of where we got to. And so you wonder why the price of energy is going up. In other words, this damage was self-inflicted. Now, Russia is happy to supply all the oil and natural gas we want. Russia hasn't cut off oil exports. They did reduce natural gas exports slightly to Poland and Finland. Of course, that was a political message. The message to Poland was, hey, stop being a transit point for arms to Ukraine. And the message to Finland was, don't ever think about joining NATO. Okay, so those are political points. But the main flow of natural gas to West Germany, Italy, and to a lesser extent, France, Eastern Europe, Romania, and elsewhere has not been interrupted. I mean, the irony is, you hear a lot about it, the G7 message, we're going to end Russian exports of coal. And then the EU met and we're going to end imports of Russian oil. And we're going to work on getting rid of Russian natural gas, et cetera. These are all announcements. None of them are in effect. This is all talk. The coal ban, so-called, we have our energy czar, climate czar, sort of a fraud, John Kerry, flying around his private jet, trying to get rid of CO2 emissions. The end of the Russian oil by ship, they're still sending it in by pipeline because Hungary insisted. That doesn't take effect until December 31st. And in the meantime, the oil and natural gas is still flowing. Germany's still paying Russia for the oil and natural gas. Putin's taking in $21 billion of hard currency, dollars and euros per month, and those amounts are not frozen. There's limits on what he can do with it, but he's getting the money. And Russia's paying Ukraine transit fees because most of the pipelines run through Ukraine. So here you have West Germany financing Russia's pursuit of the war and Russia financing Ukraine's pursuit of the war, all in the interest of keeping the oil and natural gas flowing, which they are. Now, we'll see what happens later this year, but I think my view is that it was sort of a bet that maybe the war would be over by then and you wouldn't actually have to do any of this stuff. But don't be misled by the headlines because they're, again, this narrative, but they're not actually doing it. So the point being, the price increase at the pump and the inflation in the U.S. has very little to do with Putin and everything to do with the U.S. handicapping its own energy industry, begging dictators for oil, and the influence of the climate alarmists. And by the way, don't underestimate the extent to which the climate alarmists who surround Biden, although I should include Gillian Tett of the Financial Times, but that whole crowd want higher gas prices. They want gas to be $7, $8, $9 a gallon because they expect that will accelerate the transfer to electric vehicles and make the electric vehicle more attractive relative to the internal combustion engine. Now, that's another fantasy. It won't happen. We don't have time to go through all the physics of it. Output of energy by weight, gasoline compared to batteries, and the pollution of batteries, and the fact that we don't have the charging stations. And even if we did, where's that electricity coming from? Oh, coal. It will never happen. But they're pretending. But meanwhile, they're destroying the U.S. economy in pursuit of an ideological point that will never actually happen. Another example of propaganda versus reality. So most of this has very little to do with Putin. Everything to do with hidden agendas from the Green News scam and self-inflicted damage from the White House. I would fire, and I'd be polite about it, and we'd find a way to finesse it, but I would ask Janet Yellen to go back to Berkeley or wherever she lives these days. Janet Yellen was basically a labor economist and a statistics geek, and that's a big part of the Berkeley University of California, Berkeley culture. So a labor economist, statistics geek. How did she ever get to be chairman of the Fed? She doesn't understand anything about monetary policy or international monetary economics, but she kind of bumbled her way through it. And now she's Secretary of the Treasury, which is has even more of an international orientation because you have to worry about the dollar, which is compared to every other currency in the world or every other major trading partner in the world. She doesn't know what she's doing, so she should leave. The person I would hire is Peter Navarro. He was the chief trade advisor in the Trump administration. He's one of the very few who is he has a PhD in economics from Harvard, so he's not some amateur, but he rejects most of the conventional analysis, which is smart. That shows you how intelligent he is, and is clear-eyed, and cold-blooded, I should say, about the threat from China, what needs to be done on the trade front. Unfortunately, the Biden FBI led him away in leg irons the other day, but I'd put him in the most critical trade advisory position, or maybe even national head of the National Economic Council, because I think he's that talented. I was in China. I've been going to China for over 30 years at this point. And I was there on some trip in the 90s, and one of the Communist Party officials I meet with said to me, Jim, we love Henry Kissinger. He did the breakthrough with Richard Nixon, 1972 and all that, but don't you guys have anybody else? Kissinger keeps getting older. He's 99. He's still active. But they look at, Hillary Clinton, Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, even Madeleine Albright. It's been one clown show after another, and they keep waiting for, George Shultz, I would put on the same par, but George Shultz is, I think, 101.